Hello, and welcome to a very special edition of Book Passages Conversations with Authors. This one is in honor of and celebration of the Juneteenth holiday. If you don't know what that is, or you're not exactly sure what it is, you are not alone, and you will be wonderfully enlightened through tonight's event and our authors' discussion. On June 19, 1865, in Galveston, Texas, General Gordon Granger of the Union Army delivered the message that African Americans in Texas were free. Since then, Juneteenth, as the day has come to be known, has steadily gained recognition throughout the United States. In honor of that, we have a very special featured author, Kim Taylor, and her book, A Flag for Juneteenth, which depicts a close-knit community of enslaved African Americans on a plantation in Texas. The day before the announcement is made that all enslaved people are free, young Huldah, the protagonist, who is preparing to celebrate her 10th birthday, can't possibly anticipate how much her life will change that morning called Juneteenth. The story follows her and her community as they process the news of their freedom, celebrate together by creating a community freedom flag. Author Kim Taylor is a speech language pathologist and department supervisor at a large school for the deaf children on Long Island. She is also a self-taught and I would say expert quilter whose works have been exhibited at several venues throughout the Mid-Atlantic region. Taylor's quilts reflect African American life, and she tells stories through her materials. After researching the origins of Juneteenth celebration, she created a Juneteenth story quilt, which she has exhibited and presented in dozens of local schools. Realizing that few teachers and students had ever heard of the holiday, she was moved to write the book. Dr. JaNay Brown Wood has graciously agreed to be in conversation and moderate today's event. She is an award-winning children's author, poet, educator, and scholar. Her first children's book, Imani's Moon, won the NAESP Children's Book of the Year Award and was featured on Stephen Colbert's The Late Show and Storytime with the Metropolitan Museum of Art. With that, I will turn it over to JaNay's very capable hands, and thank you both for being on today.
Thank you so much, Paula.
Thank you, Paula. So, Kim, I just want to start off with saying welcome. Welcome here. I'm so excited to be engaged in conversation with you to discuss your beautiful book, A Flag for Juneteenth.
Thank you so much, JaNay. And I am honored to be in the same Zoom space with such an amazing author. I cannot wait to read your books.
Thank you. The feeling is absolutely mutual. So I want to just start right off with hearing about the inspiration for your book. And for those who have not had a chance to look at the book yet, to read it, you're in for a treat. It's a beautiful book. So Kim, can you start us off with telling us a little bit about the inspiration for your book?
Sure. So several years ago, 2014, I was invited to a Juneteenth celebration at a local church. And I was very excited to go to a party, but I had no idea what Juneteenth was. And I was very pleasantly surprised when I got there. There was just an amazing, joyous celebration with spoken word and soul food and people selling things that they had just brought home from Africa. And it was just so exciting and so much fun and so beautiful. And when I left that celebration, I was excited and happy that I had been there, but I was also saddened and a little bit angry that I had not heard of it. And I was almost 50 years old. So I went home and I just devoured everything I could find about Juneteenth. And I was inspired to create a Juneteenth story quilt, a very big one, about 6 feet long. And I started to show it around. People started to ask me if I would show it at a couple of schools and different festivals. And when I was doing that, many of the kids and also their families and teachers, many of them did not know about Juneteenth. And if they had heard of it, really didn't know a lot about Juneteenth. So I wrote a little story to go with my story quilts, and I would read it as I showed off the quilts, and it helped people to connect to the quilt a little bit. And people started to tell me, you should really, do something with it, publish it, do something. But I wasn't really interested in that. I really just wanted to have a story that would help me explain my quilts and explain this significant event in history. And then the pandemic hit in 2020, and I didn't have my long commute to work. So as soon as work was done, I sat down and tried to tweak my story and make it more into a book. I added a protagonist, young Huldah. She is in the original story quilts. And really, it was just a beautiful journey, just writing a story that would kind of help kids understand what Juneteenth was about.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Yeah, something that really resonated with me and what you were sharing here is that idea that here you were 50 years old and had never even heard of Juneteenth. Like, what is that, right? And I have a similar experience. I don't ever remember learning about Juneteenth in school growing up. And I mean, that's such a disservice to children, right? To not know about this important milestone in African American history, for example. And so I just love that you've used your book as a way to sort of bridge that gap and to give information to readers about this, this momentous holiday. So for those of us who might be new to Juneteenth, they're like, what is this? I know there's a holiday now. What is this? Can you do us a favor and just give us sort of a quick introduction or an explanation of what Juneteenth is?
So first of all, Juneteenth, the word, is a combination of two words, the word June and the word 19. That is the date that Union soldiers rode into Galveston, Texas, and announced that all enslaved people were free. So the words June and 19th come together and form the word Juneteenth. It wasn't called Juneteenth that first year. It was called a Jubilee or Emancipation Day. But a year later, they decided to put those words together and form the word Juneteenth, which is so amazing. But Juneteenth is, like I said, the day that these Union soldiers rode in. And unfortunately, this was 2.5 years after the Emancipation Proclamation was signed by President Lincoln. And so people generally ask, like, why did it take so long? And there are a couple of theories. Some people think the messenger got lost. That's usual. Some people think that, because there wasn't a lot of the wonderful things that we have today, like we didn't have telephones back then, that it was just a very long process to get to where they were going. But the most likely reason is that, plantation owners were getting something from having enslaved people. They were getting free labor. They were making lots of money.
Sure.
And did not want to, there was a choice not to let the enslaved people know that they were in fact free for so long. So that's really the story of Juneteenth, and it's really just a jubilee, a celebration, an exciting celebration about independence and freedom, much like the 4th of July, which is taught in schools and is celebrated every year. Juneteenth is very similar. It's a type of independence.
Great, thank you for that. So this might be a great time for you to pull out the book and share a few pages so all of our, our listeners here can get a taste of this really beautiful book that you created.
Absolutely, I'd love that. I'll give you a quick brief overview of the book, and then I'll read a couple of pages.
Sounds good.
My book starts off with a little girl, Huldah, who later on we'll talk about symbolism and why I named characters in a certain way. But Huldah is getting ready to have a 10th birthday the very next day. And the very next day happened to also be Juneteenth, or Jubilee Day. And so she didn't know what was going to happen the next day. She expected to have a birthday celebration. When the announcement of freedom is made, everybody in that community on that plantation start to do things. So the women in the community start to sew freedom flags. The men in the community, well, I'll talk about the children first. The children go to the woods and collect tree branches to make flag poles. And the men in the community carve the poles with designs and Adinkra symbols. So the specific one that the father and the other men in the community are carving is called Fawahodi, and it means independence and freedom. So there's a lot happening. The pages that I'll read to you are of what the children are doing, and then what the father and the other men are doing. Okay.
Sounds great.
So here's my copy of the book, A Flag for Juneteenth. I don't know if you can see that.
Yep, it looks perfect. Mm-hmm.
And the children are collecting sticks. Laughing children searched for smooth tree branches to use as flagpoles. Find a stick, not too thin, not too thick. Make a flag for all to see, make a flag for Jubilee. Papa and the other men carved the branches with beautiful designs. Papa, what does that mean? I asked, pointing. His finger made an outline of the carved out space. This symbol is called Fawahodi. It means independence and freedom. So much more happens in this very short little children's book, but that's a great way to talk about how the community of now freed people reacted to this wonderful announcement. Everybody in the community had something to do.
I love that. And the feel of community and familial ties and celebration really spill from the pages, especially as we're looking at the artwork. But before I talk about the artwork and the quilting, I wanted to go back to your mention of symbolism. And I wanted you to talk a little bit more about where you came up with Huldah, and then also some of the other symbols that are embedded within your story.
Yes. So I had to be very deliberate about my messaging. I recognize that this book is for very young children. It's not meant to explain the entire enslavement period. It's not really meant to talk about everything that's involved with Juneteenth. But it is meant to draw kids in so that they want to know more about this significant event, not only in African-American history, but American history. So I wanted to do certain things. I wanted the names to have meaning. Huldah is a name that I found when I Googled a prophet. I wanted a prophetess from a biblical name, you know. When I Googled biblical names of prophetesses, Huldah's name came up. It was a name I never heard of, and I wanted the kids that read my book to not be able to connect with their friends, Emily or Beth, or, you know, I wanted it to be something special and different. And out of all the list of prophets that came up, Huldah was the only one that was Black. I felt like it was definitely a sign. So I felt
Absolutely,
yeah. She was beautiful too. What a gorgeous picture. I just had to, I felt like that had to be the name of my main character. The baby Eve is also a biblical name, which means to breathe or to live. It's Hebrew. And I wanted that symbol to just really be about, this infant now being out from underneath the burden of illegal enslavement. So it's a new beginning, a new life, a new breath, so that's why the baby is called Eve. One other name in the book, Mr. Menard, who is the oldest man on the plantation. His name is Menard because that is the name of the first plantation owner in Galveston, Texas, the founder of Galveston, one of the founders. And I really wanted to let my readers know, especially the adults, because they're the ones that would really get that, that many of most enslaved people had the names of the plantation owners, and that was very deliberate. Our last names were taken away from us so that we would not have a connection to our lineage. So this was a way to do that, erasing our culture and our family lineage. So Mr. Menard holds the same name as Michael Menard.
Got it. Yeah, I love that. I love the background information that went into you selecting the names. And I mean, I appreciate that you do that because I do the same sort of things. When I'm writing characters, right? The intentionality that goes into something as simple as selecting a name. So I think about my first book, Imani's Moon. And so the setting is in Africa, it's the Maasai people, right? In Kenya and Tanzania. And so I picked the name Imani because this is a Swahili term for faith, right? When we think of Kwanzaa, for example.
Yes.
And so the story is so much about sort of having faith and believing in yourself and persevering. And so that's why I picked the name that I did. And so I mean, that I really connected with what you were saying, the intentionality of selecting those names. And it almost sounds like, Huldah, it almost sounds like the name selected you, right? There's like, here I am. This is the name.
That is absolutely right.
Yes. And I mean, it fits so beautifully, this prophet. And it's a powerful name too.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. And, the whole idea of a prophet who can kind of be in the moment of something happening, but can also foresee what's coming in the future. And I felt like that was such an important thing for this book. I also, the use of Fawahodi, the Adinkra symbol, that was very important because I wanted to let my readers know that our history didn't begin in enslavement.
Yes, I got a snap for that. I'm sorry. Yes.
Thank you. So I wanted to kind of connect to the memory of what came before. The parents, the fathers, the men that were carving these symbols, they did not forget, even though hundreds of years have passed. It's muscle memory. So I wanted that to be there. And the whole concept of it takes a village to raise a child. There's a scene in there where the community gives her a freedom quilt. I wanted that connection. I think so often when we talk about the time of enslavement, we think of it as the people as a collective body,
Sure.
and not as individuals. Who were these people? What did they think about? What did they feel? They, had very limited time to connect with families, but they figured out how to do that, even under such oppressive circumstances.
Yeah.
So I wanted, people to really get a feeling of the individuals in the book, not just, a group.
Yeah. And I would say that also feels like another piece of intentionality on your part. When you're writing these stories that have difficult content, you still want to be developmentally appropriate, right? When you're thinking about the age of your reader. So can you speak a little bit to how you made the choices of sort of what details to include and then which ones to sort of, leave to maybe parents or teachers who might want to delve deeper into that conversation with children? How did you sort of balance getting the accurate history, but doing it in a way that's still, appropriate for young readers?
Yes. I think the biggest thing that I did when I first started thinking about how to write this book was considering that I really wanted to draw children in. That was the biggest thing. This is a reality that is so far removed from their own. Why should they care about enslavement? But I felt like the way to get them to care is to get them to care about my character first. So it starts off with a birthday. Who doesn't love a birthday party?
So relatable for kids.
Yes. So, that was like the main thing. I wanted to draw them in. Then I felt like I needed to be intentional with what words I was using. So I never call the plantation owners slave owners. Never use the word slave unless it's the, announcement by the General Granger, because that's what he says, all slaves are free. But the word enslavement is used, enslaved people, plantation owners, not slave owners. Plantation owners get very little time in my book. The only time they're there is to angrily walk behind the Union soldiers to ask questions, angrily ask questions. So it's those little things. So I don't explain why they're angry, but the parent will be able to, if a student asks, or teacher will be able to explain that. So I really wanted them to question and wonder about things. I was very much like that as a child. I wanted to know more always. So I like the open-ended, because I wanted to ask my own questions. So that's what I tried to do in this book. One other thing I did was I made sure that none of my characters have faces. That's a really big thing for me, because I felt that I needed my readers to see themselves in the characters. I didn't want to assume what they look like, because there were so many people and they all were different, and they were experiencing a collective thing, but they were all individuals. And I wanted my readers to see themselves and connect on a much deeper level.
Sure.
Like that's been happening. As I go around reading, a lot of times the adults will come to me and tell me they're about to cry. They feel very emotional about it. But there's a reason for that. They're seeing themselves. You're talking about a birthday for a child, and your child is standing there, and you know how much they love it. And then, so I feel like they connect on this level that that I don't know that I foresaw it to be that deep. I mean, I knew what I was doing, but when I get that feedback, it's really stunning. And kids, I read to some second graders in Washington, D.C. a few months ago, and suddenly when it was time for them to ask me questions, one of the little boys said, I think she looks like you, talking about me. And I said, wow. And then another child said, I think she looks like my sister. But I love that. I want them to think these are real people, because they are, this is something that happened to real people, individuals. And when I was doing research for the book, a lot of my research was looking at pictures of enslaved, because I wanted to really connect with them and look at their eyes and see what they were feeling and imagine what they were feeling. And there was one picture of a little girl who I just felt like, that is my Huldah. She was so beautiful and just so bright. I could see it in her face, So when I was writing this character, I really thought about her. I carry that picture in my phone. I have not erased it yet. She is. I mean, she's long gone, but that's my Huldah,
That's amazing. And here she is inspiring your words, your pictures today. I think that's beautiful. And when you were mentioning this idea of the word choice and, not saying slaves or, masters, but enslaved people, I think that's a powerful way to, again, make it that developmentally appropriateness, but still being honest to kids, right? And I think something else you did really successfully is you centered on joy. You centered on
Yeah,
celebration and
absolutely.
happiness, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, because so often, sometimes when you have these historical stories, it's easy to focus on some of the more difficult pieces. But the nuance is there, right? It's
Right.
there, but it allows for educators or parents to have deeper conversations with their children after they're reading these stories. So,
Absolutely. I
mhm.
want to know more about Imani's, what
Imani's Moon.
Imani's Moon, because this takes place in Africa, and here we are really talking about history. Um, how did you come up with your idea?
I wanted to write Imani's Moon as a folk tale, right? This is how I imagined it. And so Imani was the smallest girl in her village, and she got teased for it, but she had this mother who would tell her stories, oral tradition, right? Tell her stories that uplifted her. And so she sets this impossible task, and she fails, and she fails, and she fails, and
Mm,
finally she succeeds. And so that's what I wanted. I wanted it to be a folk tale, but just like what you were saying, I wanted kids to be able to see themselves in her. I wanted for, the children out there who might be the smallest in their class and be
right.
teased for it. They can look at Imani and say, well, she didn't let that stop her. She
Yeah,
kept going. And
absolutely.
then, incorporating these aspects of African culture, like at one point they do the jumping dance that the Maasai people
That's
do. And I
so,
used Swahili, going back to names again,
yeah,
Swahili words for the names of the animals. So, even though my story takes place as a folk tale in Africa, and your story takes place here, right? We still have these relatable elements that children
absolutely.
anywhere can pick up and connect to.
Right, right. And I think both of our books talk about resilience and
Yes.
joy and
Yes.
community involvement and just the beauty, the nuances of African Americans and Africans where we came from. I mean, how beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of those traditional aspects, like, creating quilts or oral tradition and telling stories, just from memory, no books
Right.
included in this case, right? Oh, yeah. I think it sounds like both of our books have that sort of connecting tissue, right? Things that they both do.
Yes.
Yeah.
My car license plate is Grio. And so
Yes,
I,
storyteller.
so when people ask me what it means, I'm like, listen, I'm just trying to live up to my license plate.
Hashtag goals right there.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Absolutely.
So I want to pivot a little bit
Okay.
now. We've been talking so much about the beautiful story. I got to talk about the beautiful artwork. Oh my goodness, your quilting. So I would love if you share a little bit about your process and what brought you to quilting and share that with our
Absolutely.
viewers.
I would
Mhm.
love that. So I did not have any art experience. I did not quilt. I did not know anything about quilting. And in 2008, when President Obama was elected, I was floored and I barely could speak for days. I mean, I cried for days.
Mhm.
Also, besides crying, I also felt like I need to express myself, but I didn't have the words. And I'm really good at talking, but I just did not know. I mean, it was just so it was such an emotional experience, like for so many people. And I decided I wanted to create something that would help me to express myself. I
Ah.
knew I wanted it to be some sort of art form, but I didn't know what it would be because I'm not an artist. I never went to art school.
You
And
wait. You are an artist. You're absolutely an artist. Have you seen your book?
thank you. It's, what, now it's kind of a bunch of years that I've been doing this, not that many. I mean, when you consider that some people have been quilting their whole lives, for me, I just started in like 2009, but um, I really felt like I wanted to just not pick any type of art form. I wanted it to be an art form that my ancestors used. So I didn't know what that would be. I started researching, and it's like, oh yeah, quilting. It was a very important part of enslavement time because, quilts were used for a lot of different things. They were used for, keeping their families warm, and they were used for, symbolism and messages, hidden messages in for the Underground Railroad, to remind families of their history, of their family history. Bible quilts. There were so many different types of quilts and different ways quilting was used.
Yeah.
I also learned in my research that especially women in West Africa, like I'm just finding out now that, through ancestry.com, that my ancestors came from West Africa, Central Africa. So a lot of women there were master quilters and textile artists. So it's like, you know what? I feel like I'm being drawn in to kind of try this. So it's kind of a funny story. I decided that I wanted to create a quilt about President Obama. I wanted it to be a mixture of traditional quilting, which is mostly what you see with the squares and triangles, and everything's very, very neat and perfect. But I also wanted it to be kind of an art quilt because I wasn't a quilter, so I didn't want to mess up. And you can't really make mistakes with those traditional squares and everything. Everything has to be lined up and in order. So there was a quilting class at a local school, and I went in there and I said, she said, we're going to make a table runner. And I said, I want to make a quilt for President Obama. She was like, this might not be the right class for you. I said, you know what, you're right. So I said, you know what, I think I'm just going to wing it and try all night.
Wow.
A lot of research. I made some intentional choices, like I would try something new with every quilt, try to teach myself something new, some little new technique. And so I just started doing it. I made a beautiful quilt about President Obama. It's called Full Circle of History. You can find it on my website. It's upstairs hanging, so I can't really bring it down. But that was the beginning. And since then, I've done like several quilts that all have some significance. I heard a beautiful song by Nina Simone. Yeah, Feeling Good, that song. And I've never heard it by her. And I was so moved by it. I created a quilt about it. Most recently, I did one right before the illustrations for this book, my autobiography quilt. And that one has 12 scenes of my life. I love that one. That one is my favorite right now.
Wow.
But then for this book, I did not go into it thinking I was going to illustrate this book. As a matter of fact, I had very specific ideas about having someone paint the illustrations. I felt that because of the content and how far removed children's reality is from this time, that I felt like they needed very specific pictures and, very concrete. I knew I wasn't going to do faces if I did it because I don't do them on my quilts. And I thought that was going to be too abstract. But my agent, I'm with Serendipity Literary Agency. They picked me up really quickly. It was exciting. And like, we feel like you should quilt the illustrations. And I was like, no way. And then Neil Porter Books, Holiday House Books, wanted to sign me, but apparently he was asking also if I would illustrate with quilts. And at some point I just said, you know what, I will try it. It's very scary for me.
I'm glad you did though. Like you took the leap and look what you produced.
Oh, thank you. I'll show, I have a couple of them.
Can you share if you have some quilts to share?
Some of them, like right here. So you can probably see the, I don't know if you could see it through the plastic. I could take that off.
Oh.
Yeah, but
Wow.
you can see the sewing. And the quilt panels are very small. I don't know if you can see. They're just squares. And in some of them, there's a lot going on. So it took 14 months, over a year, to create the 26 illustrations. And I'm surprised I don't have an ulcer because on some of them, I was really terrified.
You
But
persevered like our characters, like we were just
Yeah.
saying, you were resilient.
this one is my favorite illustration.
Oh, yes, the jar.
Yeah.
Mm.
I love this illustration because, you know, growing up, I had the luxury of, I lived in an apartment building in Brooklyn. We had a courtyard in the middle of like, it was like kind of four buildings, and the parents would always be watching from the windows, you know, throwing money down for ice cream. And we had this great community of kids. But then in the summers, I was able to go to summer camp and to sleepaway. So I truly fell in love with the woods very early. So a lot of my book happens in the woods, you know,
Yeah, yeah.
references. And in this illustration, I feel like it really just shows how big nature is, how big the sun is really the future, how big this future of freedom is going to be for Huldah. And she's so small, but she just captures that, man. She's like, you know, she's so brave. Yeah, it's like really like my favorite.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. And again, symbolic.
Yeah.
You do a fantastic job really pulling in those symbols into your story.
Thank you so much, JaNay.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you one more question because I know we're getting close to winding down.
Okay.
But Kim, I wanted to know, what do you hope children take from your books or this book or maybe future books? Like if you were to say, I hope children take this away from my books, what would you say it is? What was the takeaway for them?
I think I want them to always remember how important freedom is, because
Oh,
we cannot take that for granted. And there's so much happening right now. There are book bans, there are all kinds of things that freedoms can be taken away with just, you know, the signing of a paper. So I want them to remember how precious and important freedom is. But also, I think even more than that, I want to remind them to always, always ask questions
mm,
about things, want to know more, and to remember that African American history is American history. It's not
yes.
just a bit, and that all history is important. And to always listen to find out more.
That sounds wonderful. I appreciate that. I think when I write for children, I want them to feel validated. I want them to be able to find themselves in these authentic ways that speak to them, whether it's talking about historical things, but also just everyday things of just, in our case, a Black child being a Black child in America. So
Yes,
I want them to be able to find those joyful pieces, those things that resonate with them and that they connect to, so that they feel validated in their experiences and that they know that they are loved and they are important just the way they are.
yes, I love that. And that is so true, Sinead. Thank you for that.
Yeah,
I am looking for the same thing. I am.
I
And I
love
love
it.
working with kids. I'm always trying to do that as well. So I think that's so important. And thank you for all you do and your books. I cannot wait to get into them.
Thank you. I appreciate it. This has been such a lovely conversation. Paula, I think we're going to turn it over to you.
Yes. Hi, Paula.
I hate to interrupt because you two are fantastic together, and we could go on with our
Yeah.
celebration, which I actually credit um, Kim for helping me embrace Juneteenth as a celebration and not just an observation or
Mm,
in honor of.
Right.
We talked a little bit beforehand about how sometimes people were, as a Black community, conflicted on the holiday because obviously there was that 2-year gap,
Yes.
uh, which is very disturbing,
Right.
that enslaved people in certain parts of the country, and specifically in Texas, didn't even know for 2 years that they were free.
yeah,
So, but it is important to acknowledge it, honor it, and now we can actually embrace it and celebrate it. I
Absolutely.
do have a couple questions of my own, but also from audience members. So I'd like to present a few of those. Speaking of the holiday and how we observe it, Anita asked, although she appreciates observing what happened on June 19th, 1865. She's curious, why do we celebrate the date when enslaved people in Texas found out and not the date in 1863 when the Emancipation Proclamation was actually signed? Obviously, you two are not setting yourselves up to be history experts, but I think Anita just kind of wants your opinion, or if in your research for the book you came upon that.
Yeah, well, thank you for that question, Anita. And it is an important question because, Emancipation Proclamation had, such significance. It was really kind of a legal end to enslavement. However, how can we acknowledge an end to enslavement when some of the enslaved people were not yet notified that they were free? So it's sort of a continuum of announcements. And Texas wasn't the only place that found out later. There were other places, but the Juneteenth celebration is the one that everyone seemed to really kind of embrace as the end. So the signing of that paper was very important, but how can we celebrate that if we can't really fully celebrate it? So I think Juneteenth is important to celebrate and acknowledge the Emancipation Proclamation, but I think it's important to celebrate Juneteenth as well.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Thank you, Kim. That makes a lot of sense. I have a couple questions, starting with, this is kind of for both of you. Well, no, it's for JaNay. Kim, because JaNay asked such great questions, you explained what inspired your book from your Juneteenth quilt and showing it around and realizing how many teachers and students actually were unaware of the holiday and its significance. But I'm curious, JaNay, what started you on your journey to writing children's books specifically?
Absolutely. So I have an interesting story, but I think I also have a story that many, people of color relate to. I remember being a young child and not being able to find books that looked like me. And subsequently, I hated reading. This is the crazy part. I hated reading. I liked being read to, but I just couldn't find books that really connected with me. And so I remember being in like elementary school and we were supposed to read these books and I would not read them. I would skim them 2 minutes before the comprehension test and then like wing it. But while I didn't like to read, I loved writing. So during that time, I was writing my own stories with myself and my family in them. I actually have stories. I have a book that I wrote in 6th grade and illustrated. It's unpublished, clearly. And it was called Taylor the Tyrannosaurus Rex. And my little sister's name was Taylor. So she was in it. My cousins were in it. And, they have unique names that you would never find in books. Maybe more likely nowadays, but definitely not back then. So I wrote myself into stories. I even wrote these books that I called Detective JaNay. And so I was like a detective and I was solving crimes and I had a husband named Mitchell. I don't even know where that came from. But so I hated reading, but I loved writing and I loved writing my own stories. And so that really got me going on this journey to write. And so now it's also a really big impetus to why I do what I do. As I was sort of mentioning before, I write books because I believe all children should be able to find themselves in authentic ways. I want them to be able to, again, an editor gave me this term that I had never heard of before her, and she said, casual diversity. So in other words, the conflict of the story isn't being Black, right? That's not the conflict of the story. The conflict of the story is something else, and it just happens to be Black characters. Like my book, Grandma's Tiny House, is about everybody's going over Grandma's tiny house. Will everyone fit? And so here are all these family members bringing in food and more are piling in. So the conflict isn't that, they're Black. The conflict is, will everyone fit? Or
Right.
my book, shh, the baby's asleep. Mama, just put the baby down. Can we stay quiet long enough for the baby to have a nap? So, I try to write books where kids can find themselves and their experiences and their families, and so they can feel validated in their experiences. That's what got me going.
How beautiful, JaNay. I love that. I can't wait to read your books. I love children's books and they excite me so much. So I know I'm going to love them.
I hope you do.
Will, for
You
sure.
have to email me and tell me what you think of my books.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, I mean, JaNay, you bring up a good point as far as you weren't seeing yourself in books. And you're way younger. I'd like to ask both of you, do you have a distinct memory of a book where you saw yourself or as in Black characters, maybe Black female characters? I'll put myself out there first. I could be wrong, but I don't think I have a distinct first memory as far as any children's books or YA in my generation, which should be Kim's. We're kind of around the same age. But I do distinctly
25, right? You're both
Yeah, that's
25.
I love
Very
you,
good.
my new best friend, my new best friend.
Sally, Megan,
But I don't have a memory really until Maya Angelou. I know why the cage bird sings. And I think it was high school. Am I wrong? She was taught in high school, not
Right.
junior.
Yeah,
No,
generally.
So I mean, that's my first memory. How about you, Kim, and how about you, JaNay? Of a Black character or specifically Black female character. And then of course, subsequently, Toni Morrison, The Bluest Eye, and yeah, beloved.
I was a very unusual kid. I loved to read. I loved to lose myself. And interestingly, because I was telling JaNay a little while ago, because I had this kind of life where I was in a very Black community, my buildings, all my friends. I also went to this camp where I was the only Black kid. Me and my sister, we were the only ones. But my focus was not so much on that. I made great friends. My focus really was on like nature and the woods and that kind of thing. So I always sought out books that was the main character for me. I love that. I remember one of the books was called The Other Side of the Mountain or My Side of the Mountain. And it was about a little boy who got lost and he built like this tree house and I was totally into it. I didn't even look at the kid because I was that kid. It was because I love nature so much. There was also a kid who was very interested in finding out more about history. I don't know why, but I would look for books that talked about Black experience. So at a very young age, I was reading Soul on Ice by Eldridge Cleaver. And I wrote him a letter. I think I might still have it somewhere. I was a teenager, a young teenager, but I was so moved by his story and Black life and his descriptions that I love that. So I was a little bit older, but probably still too young for that book, but I love that kind of stuff. So yeah, so I was a little different, but I had the same experience. My younger readings were not reflective of my community or me.
How about you, JaNay?
That's so interesting, Kim, because I'm someone who I like fiction. I live in the world of like make believe and coming up with things, and I wasn't very drawn to history, and so I was more likely to find like a Roll of Thunder, Hear Me Cry, some of these stories that had, say, a Black protagonist, but it was something historical and it just didn't resonate with me, and so that's not what brought me to reading books. When I think about when I was much younger, my dad was reading things like, Dr. Seuss that had made up characters and that kind of thing. And the only two, Paula, to go back to your question, the two that I could think of is Cherry and Cherry Pits
I don't know.
and Mufaro's Beautiful Daughter. Those are the only two I can think of off the top of my head when I was younger. They both had Black protagonists. But I mean, that's two books. Like, that's not enough to
Right. Yeah.
solidify your reading and literacy skills.
Yeah.
So, I mean, instead, like I said, I was writing my own because the historical fiction didn't do it for me, and there just wasn't much to pick from. And so I think that's why I'm so adamant about trying to write kind of just everyday casual diversity stories. I'll write some, historical things too. Like I did a Little Golden Book, a Harriet Tubman Little Golden Book, and a Simone Biles Little Golden Book. But I like the frivolity and the imaginative aspects of fiction too.
Well, I do love that we're seeing kind of those wrongs righted in recent history and now, where there's just, it's almost becoming like the golden age, I think, of diversity represented specifically in children's and YA. And even you're seeing LGBTQ characters and themes and things like that. So I'm happy for young kids now that see more of a reflection of themselves. Sad for us and our history, but thank God for two authors like yourself that are righting that wrong for kids today. So we've got to wrap up here soon. So very quickly, you have to answer this next question. Kim, are you now inspired to keep writing? Do you want to do more children's or YA or middle grade books?
I really am inspired. I'm a little nervous because of, it's hard when you're working full time and to really find the energy to do it. That's been my biggest thing. And also I'm like freaked out over all the excitement over this book. So my focus has been on that, but I do feel like the last page of my book is a beginning and that it could be a beginning of another book. We can really follow this family through history. So I do want to kind of write more. I was even thinking of as Huldah gets older and the kids that are following her now that are 10 and they get a little older, my stories can be more in depth and a little bit less childlike, a little bit more serious. So we'll see how that part develops. But I definitely feel like most people don't know what happened after, what happened after that big, momentous day. So I do want to kind of bring students along. I can kind of feel where the story wants to go. And we'll see how it goes. I'm just going to keep working on it in my little mind right now. I'm thinking about what the next step is. So
yay, that's exciting. Keep going.
Yes, we're happy for that. Definitely keep going, Kim. Keep going, JaNay. I want to let our audience know, thank you so much for celebrating Juneteenth in this very special way with an important and wonderful discussion with these two talented authors and illustrators, or at least Kim is. JaNay, I think you need to tap that.
Okay, all right. Because you said so, okay?
Yes. So we do have plenty of both their books and a flag for Juneteenth at our San Francisco and Corte Madera stores. So feel free to come in and get one for yourself or gift for a child in your life. Or feel free to call, or actually you can hit our subscribe button on this channel and you can also order the book. Go to the link to order the book. With that though, thank you so much for joining us. Happy Juneteenth now and forever. And thank you to Kim Taylor and JaNay Brown Wood. Thank you for doing this.
Thank
you so much. It's been a pleasure.
So nice to meet you, JaNay.
You too, Kim. Oh, absolutely.
Very good. All right. Thank you.